It's 2 in the morning. Your baby won't stop crying because she's teething. So you're up, exhausted, rocking her in the living room while the rest of the house sleeps. Your husband's phone is sitting on the coffee table, charging, screen lighting up every few minutes with notifications. You're not trying to look. You're just there, awake, tired. And then a name pops up on the screen, a name you don't recognize. And the preview text underneath it says something that makes your entire body go cold. I miss when it was just us before she got pregnant. You freeze. Your hands are literally shaking while you are holding your daughter. And in that one moment, standing in your dark living room at 2 a.m., your entire understanding of your marriage starts to crumble. What this woman found on her husband's phone that night wasn't just texts. It was almost a full year of a hidden emotional relationship, one that had been growing while she was fighting the hardest battle of her life. And when she finally confronted him, his answer broke her heart even more than the messages did. This is a real story, shared by a mother on Reddit. And by the end of this video, you're going to be asking yourself the same question thousands of commenters are still arguing about: is this really cheating? Or is it something people are overreacting to? Let's go through the whole story from the very beginning. The woman in this story is 29 years old. We'll call her Amna, name changed for privacy. She's been married to her husband, who we'll call Daniel, 32 years old, for 3 years. Together, they have a 14-month-old daughter. Amna starts her story by saying something important from the outside. Their marriage always looked normal. They didn't fight much. They split chores fairly. Daniel was, by all appearances, a good, involved father. This is the part that makes the rest of the story so confusing and, honestly, so painful for her to process, because there were no obvious warning signs, no screaming matches, no obvious distance. Just an ordinary couple, raising their daughter, going about their days. But underneath that ordinary surface, something had been happening for almost a year. To understand this story fully, we need to go back to when their daughter was born. Amna developed postpartum depression, and not a mild case. She describes it, in her own words, as fighting for my life. Anyone who has experienced postpartum depression, or has watched a loved one go through it, knows how brutal it can be. It's not just sadness. It's a complete shift in how a person functions, thinks, feels, and connects with the people around them, including their partner. During this time, Amna changed. She admits this herself. The version of her that existed before the pregnancy, before the depression, wasn't fully present anymore. She was surviving. She started therapy around month 4 after giving birth, and she's been on medication since. She was doing the hardest work a person can do, healing. But here's the thing about postpartum depression, and about mental health struggles in general within a marriage: the partner watching it happen often feels helpless too. They don't always know what to do, how to help, or how to talk about what they're feeling without sounding selfish, given that their partner is the one struggling the most. This is a real and valid struggle. Watching someone you love go through something as heavy as postpartum depression can leave a partner feeling like a stranger in their own home, unsure of what version of their spouse they'll see each, unsure of how to offer comfort without making things worse, unsure of their own place in a household that suddenly revolves entirely around survival and healing. That confusion, that loneliness on the sidelines, is real, and it deserves compassion too. But there's an enormous difference between struggling silently and choosing to fill that silence with someone else. There's a difference between feeling disconnected and actively building a new, secret connection to fill that gap. And that difference is exactly where this story takes its painful turn. This is where Daniel's side of the story begins, and where things start to go in a very different direction than they should have. Fast forward to the night that broke this story open. Their daughter was teething. Anyone who's been through this with a baby knows those nights are brutal, sleepless, exhausting. Amna was up at 2 a.m. in the living room, trying to soothe her daughter. Daniel's phone was charging on the coffee table nearby, and it kept lighting up. She wasn't snooping. She wasn't looking for anything. She was just present in the room when a name appeared on the screen that she didn't recognize: Zara W. And underneath it, a message preview that stopped her cold. I miss when it was just us before she got pregnant. Let that sentence sink in for a moment. Not just the mention of another woman's name, but a sentence that implies familiarity, longing, and a timeline. Before she got pregnant. This wasn't a new conversation. This was someone who had clearly known about their relationship for a while. Someone who had opinions and feelings about Amna's pregnancy affecting them, whatever them meant. Amna says her hands were shaking while she held her daughter. In that moment, every assumption she had about her marriage started to unravel. She picked up his phone. She and Daniel had never hidden their passcodes from each other, which, until this moment, had probably felt like a sign of trust and transparency in their relationship. She opened his messages. And what she read wasn't just one conversation. It was messages going back almost a full year. Let's talk about what AITAH actually found, because this is where the story shifts from suspicious to genuinely heartbreaking. Zara, it turns out, was a former coworker of Daniel, someone from a job he had left 8 months earlier, right around the time AITAH gave birth. So this wasn't some random stranger he'd met on social media. This was someone he knew personally, someone he had worked alongside, and someone he continued talking to daily, long after leaving that job. AITAH describes the content of the messages as not explicit. In the traditional sense, there was no sexting, no obviously romantic declarations in the way people often picture affairs. But she says, and this is important, that emotionally, it was so much worse than she expected. They talked every single day, not occasionally every day, for almost a year. And in these conversations, Daniel told Zara things he had never told AITAH. He complained to her about how different AITAH had become after the baby. He told her he missed who she used to be. He said he didn't know how to talk to her anymore, referring to his own wife. Think about that for a second. Here was a man whose wife was going through postpartum depression, actively fighting to get better, in therapy, on medication, and instead of communicating his own struggles to her, or to a therapist, or even to a close friend, he was pouring his heart out to a woman from his old job, someone who had no responsibility to their marriage, no stake in helping them heal, and as we'll get to, possibly no idea that he was even married with a child. And then there was the message that AITAH says affected her the most. Just 3 weeks before she found the phone, Daniel wrote to Zara, "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I met you first." That's not idle venting. That's not simply having a bad day and needing someone to talk to. That is a man imagining an entirely different life, a life without his wife, without his daughter, with another woman. AITAH sat on her bathroom floor and cried for 2 hours that night. Daniel was asleep the entire time. He had no idea his world was quietly falling apart just down the hall. And here's something worth sitting with for a moment: the sheer loneliness of that scene. A new mother, still healing from postpartum depression, sitting alone on a cold bathroom floor at nearly 4 in the morning, scrolling through evidence that the person she trusted most had been living a second emotional life without her. No one to call, no one to wake up, just her phone, and a year's worth of messages rewriting everything she thought she understood about her marriage. It's worth pausing here to ask, what does it even mean when a message doesn't cross into anything sexual, but still manages to feel like such a profound betrayal? Perhaps it's because sexual content can at least be labeled clearly as wrong by both people involved. But this kind of emotional closeness hides in plain sight. It masquerades as friendship. It hides behind the excuse of just talking. And that's exactly what makes it so much harder to detect, and so much more devastating once it's found. The next morning, AITAH confronted him. She says she managed to stay calm somehow, despite everything she was feeling inside. Daniel's reaction? He immediately started crying too. His explanation was that it just happened, that it was only texting, that he never planned to act on it physically, that he loves AITAH and their daughter more than anything in the world. He told her that after she developed postpartum depression, he felt disconnected from her. He said he didn't know how to bring up his feelings with her given everything she was already going through, so instead, he found comfort in someone who, in his words, made him feel like himself again. He deleted Zara's number right there, in front of AITAH. He begged her not to leave. Now, let's break this down for a moment, because there's a lot happening in this explanation. First, "it just happened" is one of the most common phrases used to describe emotional affairs, and it's almost never entirely true. Relationships, even emotional ones, build gradually. Daily conversations don't happen by accident for 11 months. Choosing to open up to someone else day after day instead of your spouse is a series of small choices, not a single accident. Second, "I didn't know how to bring it up with you" is an explanation that might sound sympathetic on the surface, but it ignores an entire year of alternatives. He could have gone to therapy himself. He could have talked to a friend, a family member, a support group for partners of people with postpartum depression. He could have simply told AITAH, even briefly, "I'm struggling too, and I don't know how to say it." Instead, he chose a specific person, someone who apparently had no idea about his real life, and built an entirely separate emotional world with her. Third, deleting the number in front of her, while it might feel like a gesture of remorse, is something a lot of people online immediately questioned. Was this genuine remorse for the pain he caused? Or was it damage control, done only because he got caught? There's also a subtler point worth mentioning here. Notice the order of events. Daniel didn't come to AITAH and confess. He didn't sit her down one evening and say, "I need to tell you something I'm ashamed of." The truth only surfaced because a phone happened to light up at 2 a.m. while she was awake with their daughter. If that hadn't happened, if their daughter hadn't been teething that particular night, if AITAH had been asleep, If the phone had simply stayed dark, how much longer would this have continued? Weeks? Months? Another full year? This is one of the hardest realities of discovering any kind of betrayal through circumstance rather than confession. It forces the betrayed partner to wonder not just about what happened, but about what would have kept happening indefinitely had they never found out. AITAH herself raised the exact question that so many people are debating in the comments: is emotional cheating even real cheating? This is one of those questions that doesn't have one universal answer, but it's worth exploring both sides, because it says a lot about how people define loyalty, intimacy, and betrayal in a relationship. On one side, some people argue that physical cheating is fundamentally different, that it involves a physical act, a moment of crossing a line that can't be undone. According to this view, emotional closeness with someone outside the marriage, while not ideal, doesn't carry the same weight as physical infidelity. On the other side, and this is where AITAH's pain becomes so clear, many argue that emotional affairs can be even more damaging than physical ones. Why? Because it's not about sex. It's about intimacy. It's about being truly known by someone. And in this case, Daniel gave another woman the version of himself that AITAH had been desperately trying to get back for over a year. Read that again, because it's the emotional core of this entire story. AITAH was fighting postpartum depression, doing everything she could to heal, to become herself again for her husband and her daughter, and the entire time, the himself that Daniel missed and wanted to reconnect with, he found in someone else. Instead of waiting for his wife to heal, instead of supporting her through it, AITAH put it in a way that captures this perfectly. She said it felt like she lost her husband to a stranger, and she didn't even know it was happening. That's the real tragedy hiding underneath this story. It's not just about the messages. It's about a year of silence, a year of him choosing someone else to be honest with, while his wife was silently fighting for her own mental health, unaware that her marriage was quietly slipping away in another direction. There's also an added layer of cruelty in the timing, whether or not Daniel intended it that way. Postpartum depression already makes many women feel like they've lost themselves, like the person they used to be has disappeared under sleepless nights, hormonal shifts, and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive. AITAH was already grieving the version of herself that existed before the baby, finding out that her husband was also grieving that version of her. But instead of waiting for her to heal, he went looking for comfort elsewhere, adds a devastating second layer to an already painful year. It raises a question that isn't easy to answer. If Daniel truly missed the old AITAH, why didn't he choose to be patient, to support her recovery, to be part of the process of her coming back to herself? Why was his response to that longing directed toward someone new, rather than toward helping his wife heal? When this story was posted, the comment section exploded with reactions, and the responses revealed just how strongly people feel about emotional affairs. One of the most upvoted comments put it simply: emotional affairs are absolutely real cheating, and in many cases, they're more damaging than physical ones, because they're about intimacy and connection, not just a physical act. This commenter pointed out that Daniel essentially gave Zara the inside information of his marriage, private struggles, private frustrations, things a spouse should be sharing with their partner, not with someone outside the relationship. Another user directly challenged Daniel's excuse. They pointed out that saying, "I felt disconnected, so I found someone else to talk to," isn't an excuse, it's a choice, made repeatedly for almost a year. He could have told AITAH directly. Instead, he chose Zara over and over for months. One comment focused specifically on that one devastating line: "I wonder what would have happened if I met you first." According to this commenter, that sentence isn't innocent venting. It's a man actively imagining a different life, a life without his current wife and child, with someone else entirely. Some commenters offered a more balanced perspective, gently reminding others that AITAH should focus on healing and not make any drastic, permanent decisions right away, whether that's staying or leaving. They encouraged her to continue her individual therapy and consider couples counseling as well, giving herself space and time to process everything before making a life-changing choice. One particularly striking comment came from someone who had personally experienced severe postpartum depression themselves. They said that watching your partner struggle with something as difficult as PPD and choosing to complain to someone else about how hard it was for you, instead of stepping up to support your partner, is deeply troubling behavior. There was also skepticism about Daniel's dramatic gesture of deleting Zara's number in front of AITAH. Several commenters pointed out that this wasn't necessarily proof of genuine remorse. It could just as easily be damage control, something done only because he was caught, not because he had a genuine change of heart. Their advice to AITAH was consistent: watch what he does moving forward, not just what he says in the heat of getting caught. And then there was a smaller, quieter thread of conversation, people asking a genuinely difficult question. Does it matter that this never became physical? Is there a real difference when it comes to rebuilding trust between an emotional affair and a physical one? This sparked dozens of replies, with people sharing their own personal experiences and opinions, showing just how personal and complicated this topic really is. One commenter offered a perspective that tried to bring some balance to the conversation, pointing out that people don't simply wake up one day and decide to have an affair, whether emotional or physical. There are usually cracks in the relationship beforehand. This doesn't excuse what Daniel did, but it does suggest that if Amna decides to stay and try to rebuild the marriage, both of them will have serious work to do, not just Daniel apologizing, but both partners addressing what led to this disconnect in the first place. Another commenter brought up something practical that a lot of people seem to agree with: the timeline itself. They pointed out that Daniel left his old job 8 months before Amna gave birth, meaning he had already left the workplace where Zara worked. Yet, he kept the conversation going for months afterward, well past any natural reason for staying in touch professionally. That, to this commenter, was proof that the relationship had already become personal long before Amna's pregnancy or postpartum depression even entered the picture, undercutting the idea that her depression was the sole root cause. There was also a comment from someone who works as a couples therapist, who offered a slightly more clinical perspective. They explained that in their professional experience, emotional affairs often develop specifically because one partner avoids conflict or difficult conversations altogether, choosing the path of least resistance and outside connection instead of doing the harder, more vulnerable work of addressing problems directly with their spouse. They encouraged Amna to seek a therapist who specializes in infidelity recovery specifically, noting that general couples counseling and infidelity-focused counseling can look very different in approach. Before moving into the bigger lessons of this story, it's worth pausing on someone who's mentioned throughout, but never actually speaks for herself. Zara. Amna clarified in one of her edits that, based on what she read, Zara likely had no idea Daniel was married with a 14-month-old daughter. He never mentioned his wife or child to her. That detail changes the shape of this story quite a bit. If that's true, then Zara wasn't necessarily a woman knowingly pursuing a married man. She may have simply been a coworker who developed a close, ongoing friendship with someone who deliberately hid the most important facts of his life from her. In some ways, that makes Daniel's behavior even more calculated. He wasn't just being emotionally unfaithful to Amna, he was also potentially misleading Zara about who he really was: a husband and father, allowing her to invest emotional energy into a relationship built on incomplete, curated information. This is a detail that often gets lost in stories like this. The public conversation tends to focus entirely on the other woman as a villain, when in many cases, especially ones like this, the person doing the hiding, the one with the spouse, the child, the actual commitment, is the one making every deceptive choice. Zara, if she truly didn't know about Amna and their daughter, was in her own way also being deceived, just in a very different sense. It's a reminder that emotional affairs rarely involve just two people's feelings. They involve two relationships being quietly damaged by the same set of secrets. Let's step back for a moment from Amna and Daniel's specific situation and look at the broader lessons this story offers, because emotional affairs like this one are far more common than people think, and they often start in ways that don't feel dramatic or dangerous at first. Number 1. Emotional intimacy needs protecting just as much as physical fidelity. Many people focus so much on physical boundaries in a relationship that they forget emotional boundaries matter just as much. Sharing your deepest frustrations, your private complaints about your marriage, your emotional vulnerability, these things should be reserved for your partner, or in some cases, a professional therapist. When that emotional intimacy starts being given to someone else consistently, it creates a separate relationship, even without anything physical happening. Number 2, I didn't know how to talk to you is not a valid reason to talk to someone else instead. This is one of the most common excuses given in situations like this, and it's worth examining closely. If communication is difficult within a marriage, and it often is, especially during hard seasons like new parenthood or mental health struggles, the solution isn't to find someone easier to talk to. The solution is to seek help: couples counseling, individual therapy, or even simply pushing through the discomfort of a hard conversation with your actual partner. Number 3, struggling partners need support, not silent resentment. Postpartum depression, or any major life challenge, affects both partners, the person going through it and the person watching them go through it. But the answer to that difficulty is support, patience, and communication, not quietly building resentment and then funneling that resentment into a relationship with someone else. If Daniel was struggling with feeling disconnected, that struggle needed to be voiced directly, with compassion, to the person he made vows to, not to a coworker from a previous job. Number 4, consistency reveals more than a single conversation. Daniel cried, apologized, and deleted Zara's number in front of AITAH. Those actions might feel meaningful in the moment, but as many commenters pointed out, real change is proven over time, through consistent actions, not a single emotional reaction after being caught. Rebuilding trust after something like this requires sustained transparency, not a one-time gesture. Number 5. You can love someone and still betray them. One of the most confusing parts of stories like this is that Daniel insists he loves AITAH and their daughter deeply, and that might even be true. But this story is proof that love alone doesn't prevent betrayal. Good intentions, love, even genuine care for your family, none of these things automatically protect a marriage from emotional distance, poor communication, and the slow drift toward someone else. This is the question every viewer is likely asking themselves right now, and just like with any real relationship crisis, there's no single right answer. Let's walk through a few possible paths forward, not as a definitive judgment, but as things worth thinking about. Option 1. Couples counseling, alongside her individual therapy. AITAH is already doing important work on herself through therapy and medication for her postpartum depression. But this situation isn't something she can, or should, have to process and resolve alone. Professional couples counseling could give both of them a safe space to unpack what led to this emotional affair, and whether the relationship can be genuinely rebuilt. Option 2. Time and observation, without pressure to decide immediately. Several commenters wisely suggested that AITAH shouldn't feel pressured to make a permanent decision staying forever, or leaving immediately within the first few days or weeks of discovering this. Big decisions made in the rawest moments of pain often aren't the clearest ones. Giving herself time to process, while watching whether Daniel's actions match his words over the following weeks and months, could offer more clarity than trying to decide everything right now. Option 3. Full transparency moving forward. If AITAH chooses to try to rebuild the marriage, establishing complete transparency, shared access to phones, open conversations about feelings before they turn into secret venting to someone else. Regular emotional check-ins could become an important part of restoring trust. Trust isn't rebuilt through promises alone, it's rebuilt through consistent, visible honesty over time. Option 4. Protecting her own mental health above everything else. AITAH is already in a vulnerable place, having fought hard against postpartum depression. Whatever she decides about her marriage, prioritizing her own healing, her own therapy, and her own well-being needs to remain at the center of every decision she makes. A relationship, even a repaired one, cannot come at the cost of her own mental health. Option 5. Leaning on her support system, not just her therapist. While AITAH hasn't told Daniel's family yet, and that's entirely her choice to make on her own timeline, many commenters gently encouraged her to lean on trusted friends or her own family during this period. Processing something this painful in complete isolation, outside of scheduled therapy sessions, can be incredibly heavy. Having even 1 or 2 people who know the full truth, who can check in on her and her daughter during the hardest days, can make a meaningful difference in how she copes moving forward. Only AITAH truly knows her own heart, her history with Daniel, and how much she believes this relationship can genuinely change. But whichever path she takes, she deserves to feel supported, heard, and never made to feel like her pain caused by someone else's choices during her hardest year is somehow her fault. It's also worth acknowledging something many people overlook in situations like this: there is no wrong choice here in the way people sometimes assume. Staying and working to rebuild the marriage doesn't automatically mean AITAH is settling, or that she's not strong enough to leave. And choosing to leave doesn't automatically mean she's giving up on something that could have been saved. Both paths require immense strength, just in different forms. What matters most is that whichever direction she chooses, it comes from her own clarity and her own healing, not from guilt, not from fear of being alone with a 14-month-old, and not from pressure to keep the family intact for appearances. Marriages can survive emotional affairs. Plenty of couples have gone through something similar and come out the other side with a stronger, more honest relationship than they had before, but only when both partners are fully willing to face the uncomfortable truths that led there in the first place. It takes more than an apology and a deleted phone number. It takes real, sustained change, brutal honesty, and often professional guidance to get there. If Daniel isn't willing to do that deeper work, no amount of promises will be enough to rebuild what was broken. This story struck such a nerve online because it touches something so many people are quietly afraid of: the idea that you can be right there, in the same house, in the same bed, and still lose your partner to someone else without even realizing it's happening. It also forces an uncomfortable but important conversation: what actually counts as cheating? Is it only physical acts? Or is giving someone else your emotional honesty, your daily thoughts, your vulnerability, the very things a marriage is built on, just as much of a betrayal? If you were in Amna's position, what would you do? Would you try to rebuild this marriage? Or would this be the moment you walked away? Let us know in the comments. This is clearly a topic that brings out strong opinions on both sides. If this video made you think, or if it hit close to home in any way, give it a like and subscribe for more real stories like this one every week. And if you're currently going through something similar in your own relationship, please know you're not alone. Reaching out to a therapist or a trusted person in your life can make all the difference. See you in the next video. Until then, take care of yourself. And never be afraid to have the hard conversations before silence becomes the loudest thing in the room. Because if this story teaches us anything, it's that the biggest threats to a marriage rarely announce themselves loudly. They don't usually show up as a single dramatic betrayal out of nowhere. More often, they creep in quietly, one unspoken frustration at a time, one late night message at a time, 1 year of silence at a time, until one ordinary night, at 2 a.m., everything comes to light all at once.